Good afternoon, Tuscaloosa. Good afternoon, Tuscaloosa, Internet World, downtown Northport, West Alabama, wherever you're watching the Joe Gaither Show right here on BamaCentral and BamaCentral.com. You guys are watching us on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter. You're listening to us on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and on Amazon. And we appreciate each and every one of you guys. You guys can connect with the show at Joe Gaither6 on all the social media machines, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, wherever you want to connect with me. Send us your comments, your questions, queries, and complaints. We've had a fun week so far on the Joe Gaither Show, and we hope to keep it rolling right here on a Thursday, just 2 days away from Alabama kicking off against Mississippi State. We are very much looking forward to Alabama's SEC Road opener this weekend, 8 o'clock on Saturday night. Hope you guys have your coffee ready for Saturday. Before we get into the program, we want to encourage you guys to follow us at BamaCentral, at BamaCentral SI on the Twitter, on the Instagram machine. And of course, make sure you're following all our coverage as our friends Katie Wyndham, Austin Hannon. We'll have Matthew Gibson and many more over in Davis Wade Stadium this weekend. We encourage you guys to subscribe to other BamaCentral Broadcasting Network podcasts. We've got our friends Blue Collar Unplugged with Matthew Gibson, Blake Byler, and Jacob Pickle, talking all things Alabama basketball. But basketball is on the back burner. We're going to talk football today, and I'm very, very excited to welcome on our guest. We're bringing in Crissy Froyd from Cowbell Corner into the program today. She's going to tell us all about the Bulldogs today. She's going to tell us about Will Rogers and all kinds of things. Mississippi State is 2-2 so far this season. And they're on an 0-2. They're 0-2 streak in the SEC. They've had two tough SEC games, losing at home to LSU and going on the road last weekend and losing kind of a heartbreaker to South Carolina. But we're going to hear all about first-year coach Zach Arnett. We want to encourage you guys to follow Crissy Froyd at Crissy_Froyd on the Twitter machine or the X machine, wherever you get your social media. You can read her at Cowbell Corner. Of course, she works with Sports Illustrated and Fan Nation as an NFL draft writer and writing all things Mississippi State. She's driving today, so no camera action for Miss Froyd. We're very, very appreciative of her time. Crissy, thank you so much for carving out some of your afternoon.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
No problem. I really appreciate it so far. And I read some of your story and read a lot of your stories in the last day and a half, getting ready for this interview. I just want to open us up by getting your general thoughts on Mississippi State's 2-2 start so far. Obviously, you beat Southeast Louisiana, you beat Arizona, and then you kind of get the doors beat off you by LSU. You go over to South Carolina and lose a heartbreaker, turning the ball over in the red zone. Just kind of what's your overall out-and-out thoughts on Mississippi State so far this season?
Well, I mean, the first game of this season was against a cupcake opponent. So, I mean, whenever you have an SEC team that's of that caliber, even on a bad year, you kind of expect them to record a dominant win, which is what they were able to do over the Lions. But everything else, it's been a poor performance to me overall on both sides of the ball. I think it's been a very disappointing start. I think that whenever we think about the fact that it's a completely different coaching staff, obviously, since Zach Arnett decided to fire Mike Leach's entire staff after he died. I think that we expected there to be a state of transition, but I mean, this is a team. It's an SEC team. You are supposed to play up to a certain standard, and they've not done that. As I said before, I kind of feel bad for the players having to go through this huge thing because a lot of them were recruited into a different scheme. But I mean, even some of the ones that were recruited by Joe Moorhead, which I think that people forget that Will Rogers is, yes, he's technically an air raid quarterback. He came from an air raid style system in high school. He was recruited by a coach that ran the triple option and was the direct opposite of Mike Leach. So it's been kind of interesting to watch him struggle a little bit there. But I think that Mississippi State, we knew them last year for a team that had a really solid defense under Zach Arnett. That's not necessarily been the case this year. I thought that Spencer Rattler bounced back from what was a highly inconsistent performance in the previous week. But I did think that in that game against South Carolina, that Mississippi State, the passing game finally came back to life, which I think has been the issue. And it's so ironic to me the way that Zach Arnett made all these moves and they started running the ball more, which has been effective for them at times. But it's the irony to me that your first truly good offensive performance in which you almost get your first SEC win of the season is whenever Will Rogers throws the ball 48 times.
Exactly, and you've got you lay it all out there perfectly right there. And I wanted to kind of really get into the thought process behind Zach Arnett. Zach Arnett, obviously, there's no offensive coordinator last year. It's Mike Leach. Mike Leach runs the offense, and as he is an absolute genius. And the air raid system is what it is. You've done extensive research on the air raid system, and he's had success. Obviously, Mississippi State was in a lot of ball games. Now, not against Alabama over the last couple of years, but Mississippi State had been very respectable, and Will Rogers was kind of going into the SEC season as one of the top two or three quarterbacks in the league. Struggled so far. What you've covered Mississippi State for a little bit of time now. Why do you think the motivation, or what do you think the motivation was for Zach Arnett to go out and hire Kevin Barbay from App State, move away from the air raid system, go into a more more traditional pro setting offense? Why do you think he just goes away? Because I've got a couple Mississippi State friends who have been sending me lots of text messages over the last couple of weeks that everything is broken and none of the personnel matches up with what they want to do. And obviously you just outlined the defensive problems, and we'll get into that as well. But what do you think the motivation is? Zach Arnett, you've grown up under the Mike Leach system, at least on the opposite side of the ball. You were given a great opportunity to lead your first SEC program, but you decide to blow up everything that's really worked on the offensive side of the football.
Yeah, I think just to put it simply and to put it bluntly, I think that Zach Arnett thought that he had it all figured out. And I think that he got an opportunity from Mike Leach to be a defensive coordinator at this level in a way that I'm not quite sure that anyone else would have done for him that quickly at that time. And I think that Zach Arnett was good at conducting the defense, but I think that he had it in his head. I can't confirm this. I haven't spoken to him about it,
Sure.
obviously. I think he had it in his head that running the ball like every other SEC team does for the majority of recent history, that's just that needs to happen. That needs to be a part of the offense. Offense needs to be more air quotes balanced. And there's two ways to look at balance whenever we run an offense, and that's to take the word quite literally and to pass the ball as many times as you run the ball, or kind of split the play calling up between those two things equally, or it's distributing the ball to a large number of receivers to whoever can score. That's the difference between the air raid and everything else. And I think that last year, Mississippi State still won 9 games. I feel like people don't really look at that enough. But last year, the issue was with execution. There's so many people that want to look at the Mississippi State offense or any offense across college football and go, oh, it's not working because of the play calling. It's not working because you run the air raid, because you run RPO, whatever you're trying to do. The heart of the air raid offense and the reason why it works is because if your players can execute properly at a high level consistently, it is mathematically impossible to stop. I mean, Mike Leach drew up the whole triangle diagram. There's some mathematics to it. I never truly got into that part because it was just pretty extreme. But literally, if the players are playing at a high level and they're executing the plays the way they're supposed to, you can't stop it. It's too much for a defense to handle. And so I feel like a lot of people were going, oh, this air raid gimmick it's not working for us. No, your players were playing with no physicality. The receivers were one of the poorest groups I've seen over recent history at Mississippi State last year. And that's why it wasn't working. It had nothing to do with the air raid. And so I think that Zach Arnett decided that running the ball was going to be the answer. And it's not necessarily, that's not necessarily working. And I think that some of the play calling on Kevin Barbay's end has not been great. And I noticed that in this last game, he moved upstairs. And I think that that's helped him a little bit, calling the plays from up there, because you have more of an all 22 type of view. And that's something that Zach Arnett discussed earlier in the week in the press conference.
Well, we absolutely, I'm going to echo my friend Julian Lean's comment. We absolutely miss Coach Leach, and I really encourage everybody to go to cowbellcorner.com or go to @Crissy_Froyd to read about your great and interesting, intriguing relationship with Mike Leach. And I was reading that last night, and you caught me right in the field. I was
everyone.
which I'm a kind of an emotional person anyway, so that's not too unusual. But just before we dive further into Mississippi State this year, can you take just a couple of minutes and outline really what Mike Leach has meant to you, meant to football, and really meant to Mississippi State?
Yeah, I mean, there will never be another Mike Leach. I feel like that's the most difficult part of his passing, is that I mean, that was my primary mentor. I mean, we would sit in the film room with a laser pointer and break down quarterbacks and stuff like that. I mean, that's kind of how I learned football. And the first offense that I truly learned and truly understood all the nuts and bolts of was the air raid in a way that honestly made me love football in just a new way because of, I mean, it's a mentality just as much as it is an offense. We don't necessarily have a playbook per se, but it's the belief that partially an insanity, to be honest with you, because they say that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome, which is kind of what the array does, is repetition over and over again. Except the difference between that and insanity is that whenever your players execute, it actually gets the job done. But yeah, so I mean, he taught me a lot about football. Is laid down the basis for a lot of my quarterback evaluation as far as the pillars of evaluation go. And just was an interesting human being that would make time for anyone at any time of day. And it didn't matter who you were. I mean, anyone around Mississippi State who knew Mike Leach would tell you that he was constantly like on his phone, like texting people. We all questioned how he had time to have relationships with all these people. So it kind of taught me too that if someone is not holding up their end of the bargain as far as like communication goes, I mean that's one of the busiest men alive, and he was still able to do it. So just a great all around person, in my opinion. And no one was too small for him. And the one thing I always say is that he was always more interested in the person he was talking to than they were interested in talking to him. It was kind of crazy. I mean, whenever I first went out there to visit him and learn about the air raid, I think he asked me more questions about myself and my background, and it was just kind of bizarre to be in the presence of a college football legend, and then what they want to talk about you and not themselves. And that I truly like. I mean, I know a lot of coaches, worked with a lot of coaches and stuff, but I mean, I've never even come close to that type of relationship or anyone who even holds a candle to Mike Leach as a person.
Well, we're talking to Crissy Froyd, and she covers the Mississippi State Bulldogs and really all things SEC, South, Louisiana, LSU, Tulane, those kinds of aspects. You can follow her at Crissy_Froyd. We appreciate her time today. She's going to help us preview the Alabama-Mississippi State matchup right here on BamaCentral.com. You kind of hit off just kind of the early part of the season. Obviously, you beat Southeast Louisiana. You beat Arizona. You have a bad matchup with LSU, but you talked about Will Rogers and having his most successful game against South Carolina this past week. What do you think changed for Will Rogers this past week that kind of saw him start to maybe perform at that level that we all expected or hoped for Will Rogers going into the season?
I think it's partially because they lean more into the passing game, and then partially because we're about midway through the season, as crazy as that sounds to say, we're close to it. And so he's settling in a little bit more, as well as you can in the midst of all that change. So I think that it's just a level of comfort in the offense that is starting to be found. The chemistry with Tulu Griffin is something that's really building. Tulu Griffin had an outstanding game against South Carolina. I want to say it's over 250 receiving yards, and that's been a guy who's been very versatile. It's been an absolute ace from Mississippi State on special teams, and is now also finding a lot of success as a receiver. And I think that Kevin Barbe in general just made some better decisions. And then I think that him being upstairs, as Zach Arnett mentioned, I think that him calling the plays from upstairs is something that's going to help. I mean, you lose some of the energy and some of the connection on the sideline, but there are some offensive coordinators who do it best from upstairs, and I think that's going to work out a bit better for him.
Well, we're hopeful that it's a good matchup between Alabama and Mississippi State this weekend. Coach Nick Saban this week, and he just doubled down on the Pat McAfee show about 10 minutes ago, calling Mississippi State the toughest matchup to prepare for this year outside of Texas. Now, obviously, you throw out the USF and you throw out the MTSU, so it's really comparison against Ole Miss last weekend, and you know how Ole Miss and Mississippi State love to be compared to one another. I'll ask your opinion. Would you say that Mississippi State's going to be a tougher matchup, a tougher preparation? Now, Coach Saban credited the offensive line and credited the physicality as the reasons why for Mississippi State. I think if you ask any Alabama fan last weekend, oh my gosh, we're going to lose to Ole Miss. Oh my gosh, the dynasty's over. And then you look and see what Mississippi State's done over the last 2 weeks. Oh, you gotten beat by LSU and South Carolina, maybe some not so good performances. Is Coach Saban just talking coach speak, or do you think that there's aspects of the Bulldogs that can really possibly challenge the Crimson Tide this weekend?
I'd say it's 50-50. I think that it's in a weird way, it's always unnerving to face a team that has not found who it is yet because they don't have an identity. They're a little bit less predictable. Now, at the same token, though, Mississippi State is a bit unpredictable because it hasn't found a lot of things that are working for it. I think the biggest thing that stands out to me is how awful the passing defense and the secondary has been. And I think that if Alabama or any team for that matter can get their passing game going and has a competent passing game, between Mississippi State's defensive struggles and the extreme ups and downs on offense that seems to have just now found its footing as of last week, they've got a really good chance. So, I mean, I can see how Nick Saban could view this as some unpredictability going on because logistically there truly is. But at the same time, I think that people look at Mississippi State from the outside and see a lot of holes and know that this is a weak team, and it is.
Absolutely. And you just hit on probably my next point and my next question. The passing defense, 120th in the nation, 95th in total defense under Zach Arnett. Now, this has been a system, this side of the ball didn't change. The philosophy didn't change. But so why has, Mississippi State, you're right on Cowbell corner very effectively that Mississippi State had been known for rushing defense and really playing stingy pass defense. They had just had a cornerback go into the NFL last year. What's been the problem? Is it personnel based? Zach Arnett earlier in the week saying that whether you're running man or zone deep enough down the field, it all becomes man to man. You saw Malik Neighbors go off for 13 receptions, 240 yards, and 2 touchdowns. What's been the problem with the Mississippi State defense? They're still running the same scheme, the same system. That side of the ball didn't change. What do you think is maybe the problem, and how do you think they might be able to fix it?
I think when it comes down to man coverage and zone coverage, that they're using the wrong tactic there, and I would like to think that at this point that maybe they learned their lesson, so we'll see what they come out in this game. But I think that part of it's personnel. I mean, Emmanuel Forbes is an immense talent. He's going to be someone who's really hard to replace. It's the same thing as over here at Tulane, where I'm closer to now. I mean, they're having issues replacing Tajay Spears. They've got 4 to 5 running backs out on the field, and not a single one of them has separated himself yet. So I think that it is partially that. It's partially the coverages. And then, I mean, Zach Arnett's the head coach, but we're also giving Matt Barak a bit more of an opportunity here to step up into a bigger role, and it just hasn't been competent to this point. But it really is kind of bizarre, though, when you look at it and how great Zach Arnett's defense was and how it seems to have just suddenly crumbled on a whim. But I think whenever we look at the defense, the players that are still playing well, obviously Nathaniel Watson and Jet Johnson, leading SEC tacklers. So I think that we're looking at a defense that is still really good against the run. But I mean, you've got to have the other piece to it or you're just one-dimensional.
Absolutely. And you also have written on Cowbell Corner about Mississippi State's struggles with dual. Bump my microphone right there. I'm sorry. Their struggles with dual threat quarterbacks. Jalen Milroe, he's been up and down. He's been able to hit the deep ball very effectively, but sometimes his decision making has not been the best in intermediate passing situations. Last week, Ole Miss, Pete Golding basically rushed 3, left a spy, and dropped 8 the entire game. It slowed Alabama down to an extent, and Jalen Milroe only rushed for 20, 25 yards, something in that range, was sacked 4 times. Do you think, or is there any way for Mississippi State to improve defending dual threat quarterbacks, or will that continue to be a problem based on the scheme or based on the athleticism that's out there on the field?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all those things. I think Mississippi State just kind of enters this season behind the 8 ball in just about every single facet. I mean, like I said, the run defense it's intact, but I think that there's inconsistencies still going on both sides of the ball. I mean, we're seeing it is true. I mean, Mississippi State has struggled against every single dual threat quarterback they faced this season. If I'm not mistaken, I think 79% completion rate is the combined between all the ones that they faced so far this season, or at least the dual threats. So, yeah, I think that they're going to have to make some tweaks, definitely within the passing defense. They're going to have to get better in every aspect of containing quarterbacks that can improvise more.
Well, we're talking to Crissy Froyd of Cowbell Corner, Sports Illustrated Fan Nation. She is air raid certified and an NFL draft writer. I want to ask you about Mississippi State now, about the Cowbells, because I have never been to Starkville, and it's going to be a difficult environment. Alabama over the last 2 years has really not played well on the road in SEC games. You see in struggles with the center, Seth McLaughlin, snapping the ball all over the place, and obviously Jalen Milroe. This will be his first real road game. I guess you can call USF a road game, but he never played in it. What's the environment like with the Cowbells? Is the Mississippi State morale going to be high enough to, at 8 o'clock on Saturday night, affect the Alabama offense?
Yeah, I think the first time I ever went to Mississippi State was whenever I was covering LSU, and LSU traveled on the road to go play Mississippi State. And it's kind of odd. It almost sounds like really loud cicadas after a while. It's an odd noise. And my parents came down to a game one time and they're like, "You didn't warn us about the Cowbells." And I was like, "Bro, I just want to know how you didn't know about the Cowbells before you first
Right.
came here." Because that's what Mississippi State's known for. I've actually had the opportunity to talk to some opposing quarterbacks who played Mississippi State, the ones that went like to the draft last year before that. And it comes up in conversation naturally. But they do say that it does give them some issues, that the Cowbells do give them some issues. That's why a lot of teams the week before playing Mississippi State, there's been several coaches and players that are like, well, there's this rule about artificial noisemakers, and for whatever reason, all these Cowbells still manage to make it into the stadium and no one breathes a word about it, which is true. So, I mean, I think that it's an underrated environment. Whenever the morale of the fans is up and whenever it is a packed house, which they've surprisingly managed to still do so far this season, it's extremely loud in there. And I think at one time, as someone who went to LSU and covered several LSU football games, whenever Mississippi State's at its peak, I would say that Mississippi State and Davis Wade Stadium on a good day is more electric than LSU's atmosphere is.
Whew, that's a high compliment for the faithful, for the Bulldog faithful. I want to just go hit back on that morale just real quick. Mississippi State, the writers, the SEC writers predicted them to finish last in the SEC West. Now, some of that's their transition, but obviously you have a major kind of dampener and dark cloud with Mike Leach's passing and a period of transition. I had a friend who I met for coffee earlier today at the Tuscaloosa Strange Brew, not the Starkville Strange Brew, but
I didn't know y'all had one.
we got one in the. It's probably about 6 or 7 months old. It's not very long. It's not very old. So he asked, "Oh, is Zach Arnett going to survive the season?" I said, "Oh, surely. I mean, it's the first year. They're going to give him some grace. Is this kind of first year coach got to implement the system, especially on the offensive side of the ball, or after the last 2 weeks, are the natives getting restless in Starkville?"
I think everyone in Starkville is extremely disappointed. I don't want to call it unwatchable football, but I mean, the better part of Mississippi State football has just been insufferable to watch so far this season. But the one thing I will say is, I mean, Mike Leach won 2 games in the first year here. I mean, there's some things that are just simply out of your control. So I mean, I don't think that it's any secret to anyone that I don't agree with a lot of the things that Zach Arnett's done, and I think that he's made some poor decisions in the process. But I also know that he got the job as a defensive coordinator. Mike Leach gave him the opportunity, and then he's being thrust into this huge role quite unexpectedly, honestly. So I think that he's got a lot of things to overcome just from a mental perspective, taking on players that he didn't recruit himself and things like that on both sides of the ball. So I think he's up against a lot. Obviously, you've got some tough opponents on the schedule at the same time. So I wouldn't. It looks the on the field product really for the better part of it does look disastrous. There's no different way of putting it. I think any Mississippi State fan will tell you that. But I think at the same time that to get a true evaluation, you need to give a coach at least 2 years. Now, if it's like this next year and there's no signs of improvement, then I would say that, yeah, you need to go look for someone else. But at the same time, I mean, nothing about the South Carolina loss was perfect, but there were a lot of signs of hope there. So this is gonna be a big week to see how they build off of that against a really high caliber team, and then how they make it through the rest of the schedule. But I mean, whenever you look at the rest of the schedule, quite literally everything except for maybe Southern Miss is a question mark. So this could potentially be a really, really bad deal. And I think that that's something that people need to think about.
Talk to us about Woody Marks, Jaquavius Woody Marks. I've watched pieces and parts of all 4 games this year, and he seems like a bright spot. He seems like somebody who Mississippi State can lean on both in the running game and out of the backfield. How big or how important is he going to be to the Mississippi State offense this weekend?
Well, the big thing to look at is the fact that he's been day to day and his status is still up in the air.
Ooh.
So I think, I mean, if without Jaquavius Marks, in my opinion, this could potentially be that could potentially be the nail in the coffin for Mississippi State before the game even begins, in my opinion, because I think that Mississippi State talent wise and coach wise is already greatly outmatched by Alabama. And when we look at the team's most reliable players, you could easily argue that Woody Marks is the team's most reliable player. And then certainly on the offensive side of the ball, he is. So I think that he gives them a chance and gives them some consistency. And I mean, he's played in both the air raid and now more of a traditional scheme, I guess you could call it. So I think is really versatile, good all around player that will definitely give the Bulldogs some yards on the ground.
He played South Carolina last week in a tough game, tough place to play over Williams-Brice Stadium, and that's a heck of an environment as well with sandstorm going all night long. You turn the football over. And Mississippi State turns the football over twice, and both of them come at costly times, especially in a 7-point game. Do you? I mean, what's from my perspective, Alabama's going to win pretty handily, but especially if they play in the same way that they played in the second half of the Ole Miss game. What's the way that if Crissy, if you're coaching, if you're offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, what's the way that you think, okay, this is the best way that Mississippi State should play this weekend to give them the best chance to beat Alabama?
I would argue that they should lean more into the passing game if they can recreate what they were able to do against South Carolina, because clearly um, being too conservative with throwing the ball is not something that's going their way, and it's something that I'm not a fan of to begin with. And then I think just changing the coverage on the secondary might be something that could be beneficial, because I mean, there's something's got to give with the passing defense, because I think that if the passing defense can't improve at all, then that's going to be a big factor in Mississippi State not only losing this game, but potentially losing every single other game on the schedule not named Southern Miss.
Oh no. Oh, well, we're talking to Crissy Froyd, and she writes for Cowbell Corner, previewing the Mississippi State matchup this coming up weekend. I want to ask you about quarterbacks. Because you write a lot about quarterbacks in your NFL draft coverage. I'll take 2 steps away from college football real quick. I'll reveal that I am a Chicago Bears fan, shamefully. You wrote about Tyson Bagent, and obviously you probably have an opinion on Justin Fields as well. Everybody's up in arms in Chicago and talking about bringing Tyson Bagent into the fold. What's your opinion on Tyson Bagent? Yeah, he played at Shepherd College and played immaculately at a small school. What do you think about Tyson Bagent's NFL future?
I think it could be bright. I mean, he's a very big underdog. The level of competition narrative kind of comes into play whenever we think about a player like that, because he did obviously go to Shepherd. But I think that he caught a lot of attention at the Senior Bowl and came out of that showcase whenever we look at it as one of the better quarterbacks there against some quarterbacks that were highly more talked about than he was. So I think he's a quarterback that has a lot of raw potential. There's some development still to be done. But I think people are seeing, especially with the tools and just immense level of athleticism too. Really a freak athlete. I feel like people don't talk about that. I think that there's a lot of things to build upon there. And if Justin Fields continues to struggle the way that he has, I mean, it's always worth looking into another option. I think that a lot of people, from what I've seen, I mean, I haven't watched a ton of Justin Fields lately,
Don't do it.
but the thing is that it does seem to me that there are a lot of people that are kind of it's almost like they're talking about him the same way that the Jets fans are talking about Zach Wilson. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think that Tyson Bagent is a player that absolutely has NFL potential. And I said the same thing about Brock Purdy, and everyone told me over and over again that there was no way in hell that Brock Purdy was ever going to overtake Trey Lance. And I mean, you look at how that worked out. Now he's won a Super Bowl. So
Very nice call right there with Brock Purdy. What do you think about Jalen Milroe? I mean, obviously he's only played in the Texas game. He's played in 3 of Alabama's four games. You may not have had a chance to watch them all, but what do you think about Jalen Milroe? Lots of talk in the Alabama world about who should be the quarterback, and obviously Nick Saban has kind of settled that talk in the last 2 weeks by naming Jalen Milroe the starter. But you're still having a lot of Ty Simpson stands and a couple of teeny tiny Tyler Buckner stands. What has been your opinion about Jalen Milroe and his quarterback play throughout the first 4 weeks of the season?
Yeah, I think this is one of the worst quarterback rooms we've ever seen out of Alabama over recent years, at least. I don't think I ever expected Alabama to come into a season around this time period with a quarterback room that's as poor as the one that they have put together. Just, I'd say unstable, maybe, is the better word. Because, I mean, you think about Mac Jones and Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts, and just Alabama almost had too many good quarterbacks. The rest of the SEC wishes that they would have shared some years. But whenever we look at Jalen Milroe, I see, to sum it up in one word, I would say haphazard. I think this is he's shown some good things at times. He's had sparks, but it's about finding a level of consistency and then correcting a lot of those decision-making errors. But at the same time, quarterbacks that have this level of experience in terms of game reps, people forget how common those things are to go through. They're normal. I mean, we all wish that we had instant gratification whenever it comes to quarterbacks. I mean, it's a big piece of what goes on the field, but except for just random ones like Joe Burrow that kind of defy the odds and defy the norm, the way that he did at LSU. Because my argument for Joe Burrow at LSU is always that people didn't realize how much the receivers, like the drop rate, what was going on with that back in that 2018 season. And outside of like maybe improving the internal clock and things of that nature, I think that Joe Burrow was almost as good in 2018 as he was in 2019. So there's a lot of factors that go into that. But the majority of quarterbacks, whenever they don't have a ton of game reps, their first season being locked in as a starter, you're going to have some ups and downs. So I think that there are a lot of things to improve, but at the same time, some of it should be more acceptable.
We're talking to Crissy Froyd, and we're almost done here. We want to let her get back on the road, and I really appreciate your time so far today, Crissy. I want to get back to Mississippi State real quick on 2 different aspects, the offensive and defensive line. Mississippi State's only given up 10 sacks so far this season. Now, Alabama in the last 2 weeks has gotten the quarterback 8 times and had an additional 9 pressures. But the Alabama offensive line has not really been that strong. So what would be your estimation that the 2 sides are going to – because really, football, you know this. Football's made or break. Made or break? That's not right. Basically, the game starts at the offensive line, on the offensive and defensive line. What's your estimation of the Bulldogs' offensive and defensive line and how they might stack up with the Crimson Tide?
Yeah, I think those are some of the better parts of the team. I think that Mississippi State, like we mentioned with the run defense, is still relatively strong up front and has kept its opponents honest in that aspect. And I think the offensive line, as you mentioned, only allowing 8 sacks, has done a good job of protecting the quarterback. There are some things that I think can improve on either side of that. But looking over at Alabama, too, I think I kind of want to go back to Jalen Milroe. Some of the issues on top of everything else that I mentioned is that offensive line. And so I think that that's playing a role in some of his struggles and ups and downs as well.
Well, you talked about Jet Johnson. We've talked about Tulu Griffin, and we talked about Woody Marks. A little bit about Will Rogers. Leave an open door for you to maybe highlight any Mississippi State players or anybody or any schematics that we might have missed that might come into play or might be very important on Saturday.
Yeah, I think that Creed Whitmore is a player that's going to be a player to watch in the upcoming seasons. I think that he was one of the best recruits that Mississippi State landed. And so I think just how he factors into the passing game and how they utilize some of that new talent is going to be something to keep an eye on, because, I mean, you've got a lot of really good players that are about to be prepared to leave. And then the one thing about Mississippi State that I will say they've done a really good job of since Mike Leach's passing is they had a really good recruiting cycle.
Well, Crissy, one more question for you before we let you out of here is just a comment on Starkville. A lot of Alabama fans will be riding down 82, and the game isn't until 8:00. So, what are some of your favorite spots? We just hit Strange Brew just a little bit. Do you like Strange Brew in Starkville, or any of your other favorite spots in Starkville our Alabama fans can be looking out for as they make the drive down Highway 82?
Starkville Cafe was always a pretty big hit when I was there. It seemed like there and then Strange Brew were the 2 places that I would mostly go. But It's a really, really quiet small town. Whenever I first got there from LSU, I would leave super early because I thought there was going to be traffic, and it never really was that bad. So I guess that's one of the things that you could say about going to a road game in Starkville as opposed to some other places, is that you're not going to be sitting in traffic a half a mile from the stadium for like an hour and a half like you do at LSU. So it'll be a pleasant experience. People are pretty nice too.
Will you be covering Tulane this weekend, or will you be in Starkville, or maybe somewhere else?
Oh, I'll be at Tulane and UAB. We've got an 11 a.m. kickoff. It should be a
Woo!
fun one. Not
There you go.
really.
Well,
Tulane is expected to beat the doors off of UAB. So.
and they probably will. But watch out, Trent Dilfer. He's had the Blazers believing a little bit. Obviously, they went over to Athens and got stomped, but they were in the game for a little while. I think it was only a 7-point game at halftime.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they've shown that they can be competitive, but I think overall I wouldn't say quite to the same extent, but I would say that Tulane's just got them pretty outmatched on both sides of the ball.
Totally agree. Well, Crissy, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for jumping on and joining us at BamaCentral. Please let everybody know how they can follow you or best ways that they can support you. Obviously, at Crissy_Froyd on the X machine, Twitter machine, and reading you at Cowbell Corner. Any other places you want to talk about or tell the people to follow you or support you at?
Yeah, draft content and quarterback content at College Football Network, and then USA Today Sports Media Group, and then the majority of my stuff lives on the Fan Nation Network on SI. So that's pretty much the main three.
Well, we are kind of, I guess, brother-sister networks there with SI, BamaCentral, also on the Fan Nation site. So I really appreciate your time. I hope you have a great time covering Tulane and UAB, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. That's Crissy Froyd joining us on the Joe Gaither Show, telling you all about Mississippi State. Woo! As my dog jumps down out of my lap, trying to keep her calm. I really appreciate her time. It was a great discussion. I'll shoot her a thank you note, and please, hopefully, you guys shoot her a follow at Crissy_Froyd on the X, the Twitter machine. And yeah, that's gonna pretty much wrap me up for the day. We're gonna come back tomorrow with a Football Friday edition. Probably going to be sans Austin Hannon. Austin Hannon going to be driving back from his little stay. We'll probably have Katie Wyndham. We might find Wyatt Fulton. We might find Chris Walsh. We'll try to reach out to Steve Robertson as well from the Mississippi State side. It's going to be a great weekend, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Make sure you follow us at BamaCentral.com. You can watch us at YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on Amazon. Please tell a friend about the program. Share, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. Tell them what kind of a fool I am, or just say Roll Tide. And you can find me at Joe Gaither6 on all the social media networks. Julian Lee, I thank you so much for watching us today, listening to us, and leaving your comments. Roll Tide to you as well. Hopefully, it's going to be a great weekend for Alabama as Alabama kicks off against against Mississippi State, MSU, at 8 o'clock on Saturday. What's going to happen the rest of the day for me is I'll be listening to Hey Coach at 6:30 tonight. I'll have live updates on BamaCentral.com as Nick Saban is over at Baumhauer's Victory Grill right by campus. So if you can't listen to it live, you can check us out at BamaCentral.com for all the updates for Hey Coach this evening. Nick Saban was very animated and very fun on Pat McAfee's show right at noon today. So hopefully he keeps that same energy up as we continue on through the week. We're going to have a fun show tomorrow. We hope you come back and join us on the Joe Gaither Show right here on BamaCentral and BamaCentral.com.